I am John Sovak, and this is my paper, Evolutionary Origins of and Genetic Basis for Homosexuality and Transsexuality in Humans. Gay people evolved into existence as an adaptation to the problem of abandoned children, and this would have happened probably quite early on in our emergence as a distinct species. Early on in our emergence, there must have arisen a problem with some adults creating children who they would ultimately choose not to raise or to provide for. These adults abandoned their children. The responsibility for the rearing of and the provisioning for these abandoned children would have fallen to the closest relatives of the abandoning parents, which would obviously be the brothers and sisters of the abandoning parents. When these brothers and sisters of the adults who had abandoned their children took in the abandoned children, many or most of them would have immediately been faced with an existential crisis. How do they feed all these extra children when they can't feed their existing children? In many cases, probably most, maybe almost all, they would have chosen not to face that question. And they would have done what today we deem to be the worst possible thing that any adult can do. They would have killed the children. They would have chosen to commit infanticide of these abandoned children, mostly their nieces and nephews, because they had to feed their own children. This mass and systemic infanticide would have created humongous social dislocations in human genetic lines. We call them today families. And some of this systemic infanticide would have resulted in the destruction of those families. Those genetic lines would not have existed anymore. Our genes, our DNA, it cares only about being passed down, about continuing to exist. So family lines being destroyed, that's not good. The DNA can't have that. So there must have been tremendous social pressure on the DNA to evolve an answer. And the answer was homosexuality. What nature chose to do was to redirect the procreative desires and behaviors of the parents who would abandon their children from reproductively useful to reproductively futile activities. And so homosexuality in humans evolved into existence specifically in order to protect the families from the destructive effects of the abandonment and consequent murder of these children by their closest non-parent relatives, mostly their aunts and uncles. What happens is that some children are born who are damaged in their early socialization. They experience what we today call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And these ACEs are recorded in the epigenome. And the epigenome, if you have enough of these ACEs occur, then the child ends up becoming gay at sexual maturation. When an ACE occurs, our brains are bathed in cortisol and other stress hormones. The epigenome is able to record this data, these ACEs, as data, and then at sexual maturation, that child, that person, turns out to be gay. The ACEs also cause modifications in the neural wiring patterns of the young child's brain. But I don't think that nature would have had any way of recording or detecting is the better word, these atypical neural wiring patterns. These neural wiring patterns can be shown through functional MRI studies, but I don't see how the epigenome would have been able to record them. But this cortisol baths, that's easy to record. For children with sufficient ACEs recorded, here I think it's useful to note that the severity of the ACEs would be part of the issue. If there were many ACEs in short order, but basically it's an overall ACEs recording thing, a data recording function that the epigenome performs. And if there's enough of that data, then the program, the DNA runs. The DNA is the program, and the child ends up, the gay genes express, and that child ends up becoming gay. It's important to note how computers work, right? There's the program, there's the machine that runs them, and then there's the data that runs on the program. The epigenome records the data, the program is the DNA, and our brains are the computer. So nature's task was to solve the problem of the abandoned children, and the way that it did it was it evolved special instructions in human DNA, in the chromosomes, to permit this adaptation to occur. We're the only ones with this adaptation. Other primates don't have it. I've heard recently that there are macaques who engage in practice behavior or play behavior, but we're the only ones who have same-sex attraction or homosexuality in our species. It does not exist in other primate species, not really. The infanticide, causing infanticide, that these abandoned children would have absolutely resulted in. I think for most families, and you have to remember this is 5 million years ago. This is not today. None of the cultural things, the cultural norms that we think of today, none of that applies. What does apply is you can feed your children or you can not feed your children. And for the few families who might have made a decision not to kill the children of the parent who would abandon these children, these would be mostly the nieces and nephews of the adults who took in these children. If they had kept the abandoned children and not committed infanticide, what would have happened is sometimes their own children would have withered and died. And what do you think would happen if you can't feed your own children and they wither and die? Then it's just going to be infanticide again. This was a very, very big problem. I cannot prove it, obviously. It happened way too long ago. There's almost no, evidence. I don't think there's going to be evidence in the DNA. I suppose it's possible, but I do not see it. But the only answer to why this adaptation would evolve in humans and no other primate has got to be to prevent the birth of these children. So since nature can't know in advance which of the babies born are going to have the problem where they're later going to abandon their own children, every single one of us has to be equipped with both the computer instructions etched in the DNA and the data recording facility, which is the epigenome. The need for this adaptation would have driven a lot of changes, and I think is almost certainly a big part of why our brains are so much bigger than all the other primates. I think that people talk about language and all, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying this is part of it too. That our brains had to be modified in order to record the ACEs, and then to, for the gay gene set to express itself. So there's a gay gene. Having it doesn't make you gay automatically, but it's inside every one of us. The value of this adaptation is so very, very high that it would have spread rapidly through the entire human population. Every single human alive today has within them the gay gene set. Now, the gay gene set obviously is mostly going to be on the X and the Y chromosomes. But I think it's so important, this adaptation is so important, that the gay gene set would also include non-X and non-Y. It would be on some of the non-X and non-Y chromosomes. Also, there are different rates of same-sex attraction between men and women. Women usually are less likely to be gay or lesbian than men are. And of course, the reason for this is because women perform a dual function in human procreation. They make a genetic contribution through the ovum, but they also gestate the young. So it's more important that women be cis, be heterosexual, and relatively less important for men because one man can impregnate more than one woman. So the gay gene sets are mostly located on the X or the Y, but also the X and the Y have different instructions, different gay gene sets. And then there's some of it which is off the X and the Y chromosomes. To restate this whole idea, the survival advantage conferred by the gay gene set is so great, such that there are elements of the gay gene set on both the X and the Y chromosomes, but there are also elements on the other non-X and non-Y chromosomes. Moreover, the gay genes located on the X and Y chromosomes are separate and distinct, and that's what accounts for the differing rates of same-sex attraction between gay men and lesbian women. Transsexualism, gender identity. I am unable to see the survival advantage that would accrue from transsexualism. And so I think that transsexualism is a necessary, what you would call complementary adaptation, that when we all evolved in order to prevent the birth of these children who would later be abandoned by switching the procreative behaviors of the parents who would later abandon their children from reproductively useful to reproductively futile. That for whatever reason nature needed to allow also for variation in gender identity, transsexualism. Transsexual people exist because gay people exist. I think it just one goes along with the other. The reverse is also true. Gay people exist because transsexual people exist. It's just like love and marriage. You can't have one without the other. I want to thank Frank Sinatra, Mr. Chairman, for singing that song. Fluidity in sexual attraction thus can only exist if there is also fluidity in gender identity. Transsexualism is a required collateral effect of homosexuality in humans. This is the inference I draw. there are proofs. There's some evidence for this theory. Pheromones. The pheromones of gay men and lesbian women are different and distinct from the pheromones of cis people. So pheromone differences, they're physically observable. We can see that there are differences. These altered neural wiring patterns of gay people also have been observed through functional MRI studies. And finally, there are also observed changes, and we know this going back to the 1980s, in the hypothalamuses of gay men, because that was observed at autopsy. Now, the most crucial proof, of course, is going to be the identification of the actual gay gene sets. I think we already know where these, well, I don't know, but some people, the people who are expert in this stuff, they know. All I'm doing is I'm describing how it worked. It's essential to understand that having the gay gene does not make you gay, because we all have the gay gene, and we're not all gay, that's for sure. The gay gene is a conditional, that's the key word, conditional set of instructions for these children who are damaged through too many ACEs when they're very little, from about birth to about age 3, maybe age 4. And the gay gene set expresses later at sexual maturation, and that child ends up being a gay adult. Anyone who can identify the gay gene set and to describe it better than my poor ability to do, should do so, because Mr. Nobel's committee is going to be waiting for you. My name's John Sovak. Thank you for listening.